Well, hello, Manchester Land. This is Wednesday, February 26th, and February is a short month, so we're almost through it. And since it's Wednesday and 7 o'clock or so, it's time for the progress report here on Manchester Public TV. You may have noticed I am not Bob Backus. Bob is on assignment and will not be with us today, but we do have a great show lined up, and you'll just have to endure me as your genial host, and we'll try to have a very good conversation. I'm going to start by asking folks, if you're watching, you may want to call in. We're going to be talking about schools in Manchester. Our call-in number is 640-3091, and we really love our callers, pro, con, or indifferent, or otherwise. We're ready for it. We call this the most dangerous hour on public TV for that very reason. But we're going to be talking about a topic that's pretty important to Manchester, and that's our education system. And we have two very excellent guests to help us along with that conversation. First, we have Peter Perrick, school board member from my ward, Ward 8. Welcome, Peter. And we also have school board at large member Jim O'Connell, my Hibernian brother. Welcome, Jim. Glad to have both of you here. Thank you very much for coming down to talk with us today. There's a lot to cover. The hour's going to go by fast. So let's, I guess, get right into it. We like to start the show, and we try to start every show on a personal level, because as we say, in Manchester, nothing would happen if people weren't putting their individual effort into it. Sometimes it's volunteers, sometimes it's public officials, sometimes it's people in the workforce. But it's all individuals. So I'd like to just go down the line here, give us a little bit of background about yourselves. What got you into education? What brought you to Manchester, Jim, in your case? But Peter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, what brought me to Manchester? I was born in Manchester. I lived in the house I grew up on Vinton Street.
That's a real Manchester thing, by the way. People do that a lot around here.
Absolutely. We did just move right across the street and stayed in the same neighborhood, and we sold our house to our daughter, so she'd keep it in the fourth generation family in our house. Well, what's up with me? I went to Memorial High School. I went to Jewett. I went to
real South End guy, huh?
I didn't go too far from home. We'll just say that. After I graduated from New Hampshire College, went to professional baseball umpire school, I decided that I didn't really care about doing accounting. So I decided to coach soccer, which I played soccer in college. And when coaching soccer, I found out that I really love working with kids, Manchester kids in general. And so I went back and got my certification and became a teacher first at Crotcher Mountain Rehabilitation Center. Mm-hmm. So I definitely had use of working with special needs kids, whether they were physically handicapped or some of them were hard of hearing, some of them were blind. It was a great start to my first 2 years of education.
A challenging start. You were right in the deep end, huh?
It was, but these special kids kept me smiling all along. And if it wasn't driving an hour each day to work, I probably would have stayed there because I really loved working with those kids. But I came to, I guess the kids just talked me into buying a new license plate for my car, and it says Crusader for Life. And, I started working at my alma mater, Memorial High School.
I can understand that, being a fellow Crusader.
Yeah.
You never get away from it.
Never do. And, I taught there, I coached there, I was AP there, except for 5 years down in Pelham. I had an excellent educational career, and that's sort of what brought me into school boarding. I noticed that a lot of younger teachers were going to different school districts, and I felt it was important that an educator got on board to help with some of these educational decisions. So I ran, and lucky enough, I won. It was a tough fight. I know that Jimmy LaHoo did a real nice job the 2 years before me, so it'll be tough to follow in his footsteps, but I'm up for the challenge.
Well, I'm only going to challenge you a little bit on the luck thing. You ran a very excellent campaign. It was well run. You had a great team behind you. And there was a little bit more than luck involved with that. You ran a great campaign, and it paid off for you, and congratulations on that.
I must say I have a lot of good friends out there.
You sure
and
do.
A lot of people who worked hard for me. And, it was fun doing it. So we'll see where it brings us.
Sure. And now on to our at-large, our new at-large school board member. Jim, your story's a little bit different.
Small bit.
But it's got a fantastic recent result, just becoming a citizen just in time to run for school board. So bring us
Yeah.
back to the beginning. How the heck
Oh my
did you
God,
get here,
the
Jim?
beginning. Once upon a time. We'll jump in somewhere. How I got here was back in 1992. As you may have guessed, first of all, I started out in Ireland. But by 1992, I found myself living and working in Australia. And this beautiful young lady walked in one day. Her name was Kathy Sullivan at that time. She was a tourist, and we met, and the rest is history, so to speak. So Kathy is a graduate of West High School.
So we can blame her for
she's
your
responsible.
importing, huh?
Yeah, she'll take full responsibility, but none of the blame. So that's how I ended up in Manchester, and here I am. That was 1992. So here I am, 28 years later. Kathy and I have 4 beautiful children. And so my oldest, 3 of them have gone through the Manchester school system. The oldest has graduated. I've got 2 in college right now, and my son is a senior at Central High School. So Manchester school system has been good to me. I've been involved with school issues in Manchester from the time they began in the school system, and PTOs and parents groups, and just supporting in any way I could. Like Peter, I too had a sports involvement. I was involved in the kids' sports as they were growing up, and I ended up over at Manchester North Soccer League on the board there, and I'm currently on the state board of the state's soccer board, responsible for recreational soccer. So things with kids and young people, and I've been involved. I was a scout way back in the day. I've been a young person for a long time. Jumping through a lot of hoops. There was a time came, I had made numerous efforts and spent a lot of time talking to aldermen and school board members and mayors over the years, and making calls on the back end. Sometimes when things were really tough, we went public, and I was president of the Citizens for Manchester Schools, and eventually it became apparent. The last few years, it became apparent to me that wasn't working. And so I thought, I'll throw my hat in the ring. I became a citizen, and as you pointed out, I had given up the possibility of running for office this cycle because my citizenship wasn't going to be done on time. And lo and behold, and this is a story for another night again, but lo and behold, I got a letter from the immigration authorities in the summer, in the early summer, and when I opened the letter, it said your citizenship appointment is July, I think it was 19th.
Which was the last
Which was
day of the
last
filing
day to
period.
file. And it was 8 o'clock in the morning in Concord. Now, by that time, I had told my friends who had asked me to run that I wouldn't be running, and and there were some other candidates that we had talked about, and I said, next time around, perhaps. And so I went up to Concord, got my citizenship at 8 o'clock, starting at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning. When that was done around about 10 or so, I drove down to Manchester, directly to City Hall, and the first time I ever voted, I voted with Kathy, my wife, next to me. The 2 of us walked into Hillside. I live in Moore too. We walked into Hillside and we voted together, and the first person I ever voted for was moi. So that was quite nice. And then, of course, I went on. I ran. It was a wonderful experience. Citywide campaign. I've been around the city a lot. I've been involved in things in different parts of the city for a long time. I spent a lot of time. I because of my work with parents groups, etc. I've been in every school in this city over the years, and some of them quite a few times. And I made it a habit of going to PTO, PTG, and PTA meetings from the north to south, to east to west. And so I had a familiarity with the schools, and I had people who knew me in those areas. But I still didn't know how that would go. But I'm still humbled by the fact that I ran and that I was successful and that people had faith in me, and that I would be able to, that I would carry my convictions into City Hall and do what I'd been saying I wanted to do. So I'm taking that very earnestly, and I'm trying to live up to people's expectations.
Well, I am going to say that both of you, having been successful in your first campaign, is not the norm. And it speaks very highly to both of you and what you did to lay the foundation for that. And I'm not just trying to flatter you for the sake of flattery. It really is a big deal. I don't want to diminish you, Peter, but a citywide race too, to come in and be successful your first time around. It's the mantra: run to get your name out there, and then run to win. And you guys really broke the mold on that. And I think the city's obviously I supported both of you guys in your campaigns. I think the city is much better off because of it, and I'm very happy that you were able to do that. But now let's turn the page, okay? You're the dog that caught the car. Our school board. You can't maybe talk like this, but I can. It's been rather dysfunctional. It has not been getting the outcomes and results that the people of Manchester deserve. Speaking only for myself, the outcomes that I want. How is it coming into that kind of a situation as a brand new politician? Peter, why don't you go first? Tell us a little bit about how's it feel. You're in the pool now.
Well, first of all, I think it's a lot different than what you're saying because we have 9 new people on a board. So I think that a whole bunch of us started new. And a whole bunch of us, right from the start, liked each other and supported each other, supported what we're doing. I think, we'll talk about Manchester Proud later on, but I think that sort of showed how it ended up because everyone supported everyone on that vote the other day. I think that, we've gone to a couple places and didn't expect to see each other there, and we see each other there, and it's I love talking with Jim because he, as he said, he has a lot of things the same in common.
I'm a man of few words, as we all know.
Well,
but you use them a lot.
and as Jim has probably found out, I'm a good listener.
Yeah. Oh my God! What a combination.
And he has a lot of the same things going on as these other people do, supportive families. I mean, I'm not sure my wife wanted me to be in this position, but she sure supported me through it all. And having kids who went to all of the schools in Manchester and now grandkids coming up that are going to be going to some of the same schools I am, it was important for me to get involved because of that. And I think that, boy, it's really, you ask how we're getting along and stuff. It's fun to listen to these people. I'll tell you, one of the most fun things, and I wasn't sure this would happen, but I drive back and forth to all the school board meetings with my neighbor Bill Shea.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I mean, you guys are, 4 or 5 houses apart?
That's correct. And, we've been friendly all along the way. We're friendly when I started teaching. I student taught at his summer school, so we go a long ways back. But the guy is brilliant. I won't say how old he is because he might not want everyone to know that, but, he's getting up in his years, and he is still sharp as a bugger. And I love driving to every one of those meetings because we'll talk about this guy, we'll talk about the other guy that's between us. I'm between Bill Shea and Mr. Beaudry, so
right.
2 guys have been around forever, and myself and Mr. Shea have great talks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
well, I can remember I played hockey with his son, and Mr. Shea used to drive us to hockey games on occasion. And so I've been in a car with Willie Shea, and it is very enjoyable. He's got an interesting way of conversing. He's a very interesting guy. I've known him many years, and kind of an interesting political path that he chose. Being on the board of aldermen for I don't even know how long.
Right.
And then moving into the area of his
20
expertise.
years or more.
he was a teacher and a principal.
Yep.
So then, later moving into the school board, I think he's going to bring a great voice. I think you'd agree he's going to bring a great voice and a wealth of experience to the school board. And I guess in a way mentoring you a little bit, if you can call it that. Maybe you're mentoring each other on those rides in. But Jim, how about you? What's your opinion? I mean, you've been in organizations, you've been involved in the PTOs and the PTAs, and you've been an advocate. Sometimes in opposition to the powers that be. Now you are the powers that be.
I know, it's quite a daunting. But I have to tell you, the first thing, the day after, before we took our seats, which was January 7th, but on the day after the election, maybe it was 2 days after, I think it was the day right after the election, I was driving past West High School. And, I driven that road 1,000 times, 5,000 times, and I was driving by West High School. It dawned on me, like there was a realization, So, for the months before that, it's about running for office and, talking to people and explaining to people and asking people for their votes, etc. I drove by West High School, and I'm thinking to myself, what happens in this school, it's starting, once I take my seat on January 8th, that what happens in the school, I have some influence over. Now, okay, one of the 15 people who make decisions about that, but that's still one of the 15 people. And so that was the first sort of the idea of responsibility, that I was responsible for whatever happens over the next 2 years, for good or for ill. I might only be 1% responsible or 10% responsible, but I'm some percent responsible for the decisions made about the future of those kids. And that's actually an awesome thought, because their futures go off long after we're gone. Their futures live off. So that was my first thought. With regard to the board, this board, I think people should know, and as Peter said, we get on well together. Now, I think that's because there's mutual respect. Everybody is very different. There isn't there aren't, I can't think of too many groups, if any, of groups of like these two or those three who are sort of voting in unison, and we haven't had that many votes yet, right? Most of them being fairly unanimous, right? But and people see this is not news to anybody. Anybody who's watching our public meetings, what they're seeing there is what they would have seen if they were in where the sausage making is done somewhere. People are respectful. I would caution people that there's a wide variety of opinion there. This is not everybody's come from singing off the same sheet. I think the idea, you talked about, and I made a quick note when you talked about the outcomes we want, right? That if we could, I think even the previous boards, some of which didn't always, there was some factionalism about them, let's say, but the outcomes are generally people want the right outcome, which is great schools in Manchester. So if we could establish that as the basis, right, then the question becomes, how do we get there? And that's where the strays all run off in every direction, because we have lots of different ways in which we want to get there. But if we could keep in mind that our objective is to see great schools in Manchester and see our kids thriving, our teachers respected, etc. Those are the important things. And the Manchester Proud document goes to exactly that point. As I said, when it was presented to us, I said that I thought if it was, if people generally love 30% of it, were okay with 30% and hated 30%, that probably meant they're doing their job pretty well. Mm-hmm. And as I said,
that's the old saw. If nobody's happy, the compromise is perfect.
It's probably perfect, right? So I think anybody who would expect to see the product of thousands of hours of conversations, etc., and that they were going to love all of it and agree with everything, that was a pretty ridiculous expectation. So my thought is for people to don't get into the weeds too much. This is a wonderful effort in Manchester for us all to move together. It's a guidepost, and there is no threat to democracy, as I said at our meeting in Memorial, right? Like the school board is going to make the decisions, and nothing's going to happen in our schools unless the people you voted for make the decision to do so. So there's nobody co-opting anything.
Well, we're gonna get into that, and you've kind of teased it out pretty well, because that's what we're going to be talking about when we get into the meat and potatoes of our discussion here. Is the Manchester Proud report and the school board's acceptance of it. But before we do that, as you may know if you've seen the show, we break it into a few segments. We're going to take a quick couple seconds break to kind of regroup, talk with you guys about where we're going to go next. And folks, I hope you stay with us. And please don't forget to call in our next segment. If you have specific questions about what we're talking about or observations, we'd love to hear it because it makes for a better conversation. And you can be a part of the conversation by calling 640-3091, and we'll put you on the air as quick as possible. And all we ask is that you be polite, and we'll take your question and address it as best we can. But for now, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back in just a few seconds. And welcome back, folks, to the Progress Report. This is our second segment on Wednesday, the 26th of February. My goodness, where is the year going? The groundhog did not see his shadow, though, and that's good news because we've had some good weather. I think we're going to have some rough weather tonight, but it'll be over in a minute. And springtime is just about here, just in time for, as we were talking on the break, just in time for the important Irish-American month of March. And we'll talk more about that on the show, I'm sure. But to get back, not to take away from our guests, let's get back into our discussion about the school board. When we left off, we were talking about kind of a sense of camaraderie, a sense of diversity, but unity of purpose. As you mentioned, it is early in the year. You haven't taken a lot of votes yet, but sometimes first impressions can be lasting impressions. Peter, come budget time, do you think that camaraderie is gonna be able to stick around? I mean, that's when the rubber meets the road, and people are pretty passionate when it comes to their money and parting with it.
It's a tough question because I think the way I ran was a couple things that I said was none of us like paying extra taxes. I mean, as a retired person, I don't want to spend extra money, so somehow we got to figure out a way to come up with a couple extra dollars. And one of the reasons is we talked about the Manchester Proud thing, but I think that our superintendent, who I think as a group, we decided to support him right from the start in most of the stuff that he does. And I think that he's looking to change some things, maybe put a couple extra teachers in the classroom as team teachers and stuff. I know that he's looking maybe to, I'm not sure if he's looking, but as a group, I think we're looking maybe to take a look at the city's athletic director, which used to be full-time, and for the last 6-7 years it hasn't been. It's been part-time. You got the biggest city in the state with 3 big high schools, and you got a part-time athletic director, which has got to be tough on her. She does an excellent job, and
it's not an unimportant aspect of education. Both of you coming from sports, I of course played sports and coached sports and refereed sports. It's an important part of life. It teaches very important life lessons, but it also provides a path to education for some students. That's why it's so important in the school system.
There's no doubt. Excuse me, Jim.
Oh, please.
There's no doubt about that. I know that. I knew that as a coach, but I even knew that more as an assistant principal, because if you had a carrot out there, sometimes, first marking period, you had to make sure the basketball and hockey players were in class doing their work, because they didn't think of it, but that first marking period the grades that go towards trying out for both those teams. Same thing with the second marking periods, those grades to try out for the spring sports. And even worse, you don't think about the next year, but the fourth marking period goes for fall sports. So as an assistant principal, I always found that extra carrot to talk to a lot of these kids. And you talk about our dwindling enrollment. That means more of your students are playing sports because there's less kids to compete for a sport.
Fewer kids getting cut.
That's correct. So for me as an assistant principal, it was always that carrot. And so I think athletics are important, and we'll go from there.
Jim, your comment on, and we kind of steered it toward athletics, but
I think that, so I'm agree 100%. The fact that we don't have an athletic director full time in each of our high schools. I've told the story many times. There you can look at two examples anywhere, but out in Peterborough, in Conville High School, they've got 700 kids. Makes it a little smaller than West, but half the size of our other two elementary school or other two high schools. At Conville, there's a full-time athletic director who has a full-time administrative assistant. We have a half-time athletic director for the city for 14,000 kids. But it is indicative of how our school system is shortchanged right across the board. The most shocking thing that I learned when I became a board member was our very first day. Remember we went over to the district headquarters, and each people stood up. The various department people said, like Karen DeFrancis, I'm head of finance, and she had some 3 or 4 people who worked under her. Mary Steady, who was the director of special education, student services, she had a couple of people with her. And when our two assistant superintendents, Amy Allen and Jane Gillis, stood up, and they presented a page, with a list of a bullet line of all their responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Which included like a lot of stuff that was a full-time. Some of the bullet lines
in another
were a whole
district.
department.
Yeah.
And as part of the bullets were that each of them had, we've got 22 schools, and some of which have multiple buildings, and many of which have ancillary, game, fields, etc. And so, but they divide those between them. They have 11 of those each. So the shocking thing to me was I was expecting to hear them to say, and here's our staff, open the curtain, and ta-da, there was nobody there when the curtain opened. It's just them. It's like, no. So you think about it, we've got 22 schools. When Peter Perrick, as assistant principal at Memorial, and his principal have issues with something, or they're trying to deal with something, or there's a problem, or whatever it might be, for good or for bad, who's there to turn to? Well, if it's under general administration, there's the assistant superintendent responsible and the superintendent himself, who are already working 17-hour days. So there is no administrative. And not to say that that's the only place there are gaps. We should remember, and you won't learn it from looking at all the details of Manchester Proud, but we can get to there. It should be remembered that we have the lowest number of teachers per student in the state of New Hampshire. And
that's not a new issue. That's been an issue
it isn't, but it is new in this regard, Mike. If you go back 10 years ago, we were in the bottom 10%. There were a lot of places where we used to be in the bottom 20% and the bottom 10%. We decided to drop off the chart and form our own little club at the bottom of the 170 school districts. We make our own little bubble off the chart on many places right now. So the least amount of money spent per student in the state of New Hampshire. You can't get a cheaper education anywhere. You can go anywhere you want. I tell the taxpayers of Manchester all the time, if you want to go to Berlin, go to Claremont, go to the Seacoast, go out to Keene, go down to Salem, you can go anywhere you want. You cannot get a cheaper education than you get in Manchester. And I'm using the word cheaper because that's what it is. We have people working very hard to do great things. The fact that our teachers haven't had a contract for 4 of the last 8 years is a shame on all of us. And the fact that if you go to Channel 97 any night and you flick through it, that's the channel on public TV.
The old historic board meetings, yeah.
I would say you've got like a 30% chance of hitting a school board meeting where they're discussing the fact that the teachers haven't had a contract for a year at one of those meetings. So we have a lot of issues, lots of great things happening, lots of good people trying very hard. But the athletic thing is really important. We're going to be looking at that for sure, but we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're poised to do it, though. You're in your organizing sessions. You've kind of felt each other out. Looks like there's some optimism on this board, and we have a call. We love our callers, and so we will take it. This is an opportune time to take this phone call. Eddie, how are you? Welcome to the Progress Report. Thanks for calling. And what have you got for us today?
Hey guys, listen, I want to ask Jim if you can expand on something.
Well, the answer to that question is yes, he can.
Thank you for the calls.
Go ahead, Eddie.
Jim, you've mentioned the teacher's contract, that situation several times. You mentioned it tonight, you mentioned on your show. I guess it's 600 days and change now, right?
Right.
They've gone without a contract.
Right.
So what I mean is expand on that. Where do you lay the blame, Jim? Do you put 100% of the blame on the administration, on management, or do you put any of the blame on labor, meaning the MEA?
Okay, so thanks,
Is
Ed.
that your question, Eddie? You want us to let you go, or do you have a follow-up?
That's all. Nice and brief, that's all, and thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eddie. This is a kind of a good springboard. I'm not sure I like the term blame, but you know where he's coming from.
And I was going to say that, and too. You know, blame is sort of the wrong word. You know, because that's not where I would start from. If you're saying, do I think that? First of all, I don't have a window into the negotiation, so I don't know what's happening in the room. So I'd be guessing from what I've seen reported in the blogosphere or on the press or something. So I don't have any specific knowledge. I'm told that the current negotiations are going well. We saw that reported. I know, so we've had that information given that there has been progress. I think it's not. I think it's difficult. If you, my short version, Ed, is this: is we are $54 million. We spend $54 million less than we would do if we were spending what the average school district in the state is. And I'm not saying we can get that on a tree somewhere, but that's how much we are behind the average district. And so there's pain being felt everywhere. We had 100 teachers walk down the road this summer. This is not an easy problem to solve because the people on the negotiation side on behalf of the city feel as though their hands are tied and they can't do more perhaps, and then we're asking the teachers on the other side to accept less. The truth of the matter is that the state of New Hampshire does a lousy job of financing public education. The pain's being felt all over the state, and we should do the right thing by the teachers who are out there in the trenches working every day in our schools. And so, I'm hopeful that this process, the school board has gotten out of it from the point of view we're not involved. We don't have a subcommittee managing it. Dr. Goldhart is committed to making this happen and bringing it to resolution, Absolutely. And he has our full support. And I'm hoping that both parties come out of that room, so to speak, smiling, and that we can move forward.
Peter, do you want to weigh in on
Yeah,
this?
I have two things to add to it.
I mean, you've got teachers' experience too, so you've been.
Well, I was going to say, first of all, when I was a teacher, my first year teaching, the school district was in a top 5 per student. I know that was a long time ago, but still, you would think that over the years we would have kept that up. But as Jim just got done saying, now we're at the very bottom. I knew we were close to the bottom, and Jim, we're there. So that we've got to somehow find a balance. And I'm not saying go up in the top 5 again, but I'm saying we got to find a balance.
That could be a goal. I mean, maybe you can't do it next year, but it could be a goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the second thing I was going to say is, a lot of people thought that because being a teacher and being an MEA member for a while myself, that I am pro MEA. But what I am pro is, I'm pro making this work. And I think both sides need to give in a little bit. I think that, and I've had that talk with some of my friends that are teachers. You got to give a little to get a lot. And I think that it can be done. I think, as Jim said, some of the reports we're getting is that they're making inroads and they're making steps. So hopefully that's true, and hopefully it'll happen soon. Because I know last summer, when I decided to run, I think we ended up with like 134 teachers that left the school district, or employees that left the district by before the beginning of this year. We have to stop that trend because
And
we're losing good teachers.
And that's not the first time that's happened. I mean, Bob and I have been doing this show for 10 years, and we're losing teachers. They have to go. They can't wait. They've got to make a decision. It's their livelihood.
And by the way, Mike, we also lost, the surrounding towns. I use the Auburn example as the most obvious one, right? In my worldview, we pushed those people out. They didn't decide to leave because they suddenly, the Pied Piper of Hamelin arrived and tooted them off somewhere else. We spent a number of years, perhaps decades, pushing them out. But when you have a community like Auburn, let alone Hooksett and Candia, etc. Bedford is a different case, I think. But everybody who lives in Candia and Hooksett and Auburn, not everybody, but the vast majority are really Manchester people. Granddads from Manchester, or dads from Manchester, or moms from
You have
Manchester.
a lot of central graduates living
And
out in those towns.
They had 130 or 140 year relationship with the city of Manchester. It must have been very painful for people who bled green or were crusaders or whatever they were, to say we're giving it up. Their dads had played on teams here. They'd won state championships. They knew teachers. They were, and Auburn voted 93% to eliminate their contract and walk out. They'd had enough in Manchester. But of course, people talk about the decline in Manchester school numbers as though we have to cope with the decline. Well, in my worldview, we've been pushing people out the door for 10 years. When you have a kid in a high school like mine was, and she arrives in as a freshman, she's got no seat to sit on. When the a school board member, Mayor Gatzis was Mayor Craig, she had a child at Central High School who was in a classroom sharing the seat with somebody else, and it became a bit of a joke because she was on the school board at the time, I think, or perhaps she was on. I think it was on the school board. But her son or daughter didn't go home and say, Mom, I actually am sharing my bum with another kid. We've got one cheek each on a seat. And so even a school board member couldn't get a seat for their kid. And my kid was standing up against the wall. And then we have people, watching a show like this wondering, we have to manage decline because the number. No. When you don't pay teachers enough, when you've got the largest class sizes in the state, when you're not maintaining your buildings, when you're downgrading the contract to keep them maintained, to keep them cleaned and brushed every day, and you keep doing this every day, no one's saying.
Not to mention cutting classes from the catalog,
right.
Cutting art,
and
cutting
you keep
sports,
on going. So
cutting languages.
Of course, and the next iteration is we're being told that the schools are empty and we have numbers to support it. And if you just bear with me for one, when we talk about empty schools, I really want to talk about. I don't mean necessarily here, but I think the city needs to talk about what we do with our real estate and what our future schools should look at. We haven't looked at this properly in years, and there's no process in place right now to do it properly, and I underline properly. But the numbers you see published, people should know at least this. When you change a school, let's say our 4 middle schools, if you go into them tomorrow, there are no empty spaces, or you walk around there's not empty rooms, but when people will scream at the TV saying, "Hang on, I've got numbers here saying that they're 5/8 full." Well, right now we teach 5 classes a day. Miss Jones or Mr. Smith, 7th grade science. He teaches in his classroom, room 220A, and he teaches 5 periods a day. The numbers that you're reading are saying he's no longer going to have his own classroom. That's going to be a shared classroom with people coming out of it, and he can pick up his science experiments and throw them into a cupboard in the corner because Mr. Jones is going to come in and teach French for a period, and then somebody else is going to come in and teach art. So by definition, when you do that, without telling the public boldly that's what you're doing with the numbers, and I'm telling this this is not an example, this is what we actually have done and published it publicly and talked about it, every school is 5/8 full. Even if it was full today, it becomes 5/8 full the moment you decide to do that. So I want to arrest, especially my friends who are aldermen, who are going around quoting numbers like schools are 52% full and 53% full and 58% full. If I were a less polite person, I'd use a different word, but that's a load of garbage. So Sorry, I want to take all your show.
So basically, I want to make sure I understand this. Actually, I've learned a couple things, and we're coming up to our break, so I'm going to get the last word here, then we'll go to break and we'll come back. But so as I understand it, and I had been hearing this, but I couldn't understand how it worked, and maybe you've just explained it. By causing the teachers to rotate in and out, it kind of creates the appearance of more real estate available.
Right.
Is that what
Yes,
what you're saying?
yes.
So it's really utilization as opposed to available space.
Right.
It's more of a utilization. of
There
it.
is
And
more.
I- and I'm asking
There is
this
more
way-
to it. We have had a decline in populations. There are some areas where there is space, but it's not reflected in the numbers you see when you see broadly. And before, just the other, I'll be very brief. The other example is when you have like 4, say, third grade classes in an elementary school, and one of them is a special class for kids with significant needs, and there's 4 kids because in that class. With a teacher, and now you take, and this was done regularly, and it drives me nuts. And I'll hear aldermen, not to be anti-aldermen, I love our aldermen, they're all good people doing their best, but they'll quote the number for the total number of kids
Which is the
divided by
average,
4.
yeah.
But there's actually 3 classes of 32
That are
and
chock
1
the
class
block.
with 4 in
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
they'll tell you, oh, we have 23 kids in the class. So that's the frustration of being a school board member, and before being a school board member, being a member of the public, listening to people talking and being just uninformed or misinformed, and sometimes there's the small group. There's a small group who are deliberately creating this obfuscation.
Sure.
So-
Well, let's, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back in a few seconds to wrap this up. We still have to get to the Manchester Proud Report, maybe not into the detail that we wanted. I told you the hour's going to go by fast. But we'll talk generally about that, and we'll certainly welcome your calls at 640-3091. But we want to come back, so we got to go away. We'll see you in just a few seconds. All right, folks, thank you very much for staying with us. We're having I think, a very lively conversation. I certainly am learning things. I learn something every week on this show. It's great. We have such wonderful guests, informed guests. And we thank you for watching, and we invite you to call at 640-3091 if you have any questions or observations. Peter, you wanted to jump in on and discuss what we left off with before the break, talking about class size and manipulate. Well, I don't want to miss how numbers may not be as accurate as we want them to be.
Yeah, and I don't think manipulation's a good word.
Yeah, that's not what I meant to say.
I think understanding where the numbers come from is important. And what I was saying during the break was, as an assistant principal, my main job besides discipline was scheduling the school. So in part of scheduling the school is, a lot of people don't realize, but as Jim was saying, you could have 24 kids in a science class, and then only 5 or 6 kids that are special needs, EL, special classes for these kids.
Level 3 German.
You just took that out of my mouth. It could have been a level 4 German or a level 4 French or anything like any special classes like that might have only had 10 kids in it. The special needs classes might only had 2 kids in it. They're all going into the average. So when you're talking about average students per class, all those are averaged in, so the 24s are brought down to like 14. So the average you got to understand that. The other thing is, I know a lot of times we used to get into arguments with the assistant superintendents, the superintendents over, they want to cut a teacher here and there, but they don't realize what goes into. It's really hard to schedule 32 kids or 30 kids into 5 periods compared to if you take them and break them up into 6 periods, because
They've got other classes.
Yeah.
They're
plus, believe it or not, and I know when you were in high school, it was the same way. When I was a senior or junior, I wanted to leave at 1 o'clock. So it's hard to get 30 kids in a period G or H class because they all want to go. It might be they have to go. Maybe their parents aren't working. They got to work a part-time job to help out at home. Okay, maybe they have to babysit at home. Okay, so all these little things go into scheduling a class and go into also the number of teachers you need to fill a building. That's all I want to say. That there has to be thought going into that, because all those ins and outs aren't always there.
Well, and what that tells me is a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing.
Yes.
And folks such as yourself, who have really, dug into the numbers over the years, have a kind of a facility with it, an instinct, can smell a rat when it's out there. That's very important to have in the leadership roles. And I get frustrated sometimes. You watch something. I'll watch professional sports and feel like maybe I could do that or could have at one time, but of course I couldn't. But it looks like you can. You kind of everybody has confidence. Everybody knows a little bit. And it's a trap that we can all fall into. So it's actually good to have some real serious expertise in these things. I do want to turn. We hyped it. We're the Manchester Proud Report. I would like to. I regret we've kind of talked about other important things, and so we're not going to be able to get into the weeds of this as much as I wanted to. Maybe that's something that our audience will be pleased with. But let's talk a little bit in general. This was a long process. It took several years. There were a lot of community groups involved. This term stakeholder, I get what it means. I'm not sure I like the term very much, but they brought a lot of people together. This was not driven as much as received from the public. And they put it all together in a very readable, kind of slick, a lot of graphics report. Not too much to digest, a lot of appendices with some information, and then they handed it over to you guys. And you voted, 12-1, so pretty almost unanimous support. I don't know who wants to go first, but can you tell me what was your impression receiving, getting the handoff? They're holding the ball out, you got to grab it. What was your impression of that meeting? How did that go for you?
Well, I'll be a little bit funny here, but I'll go first because I know what I've learned over the last 2 months is if I don't go before Jim, I might not go.
Well, we are running out of time, so I'm glad, Peter, jump in.
There is an off switch. My wife found it a long time ago.
And you told me to find it too.
It's an elbow, yeah.
For me, I thought it was important. They put two long years and a lot of hours into this report. I think that Jimmy Porter made a great motion, and that was to receive it as a guide, not receive it as, we got to do everything that's in it. I think that a guide's a good word for it. I think that we can take a look at it. We don't have to be controlled by it. And that being said, a lot of things in there deals with having enough money for it. So that's another thing that's probably not going to get us to where we want to be with it completely. Some of the things that I really liked, as a former administrator, I really like they want to have students graduate with more credits. Personally, I think if the students are challenged a little more, it'll be better off for them. And to have to be in class more often, in the end, will be better. Because one thing that I saw is for many years, 90 freshmen would not have enough credits. They'd have to be freshmen again. Because I think they took a look at 20 credits and they found that's going to be real easy to do in 4 years. Right. I can slouch off my freshman year. And as far as I'm concerned, no. If you got to have 6 credits each year, that doesn't leave you much room to slouch off your freshman year. So I think it's real important that we add the idea of having extra credits. Some things that I was concerned about, I'm concerned about this getting rid of the leveling thing. I know that
That's a big issue that people are talking about.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're bringing it up.
Yeah.
I was hoping to get a chance to discuss it briefly with you
Well,
guys.
with me, I can understand the superintendent wants to have one level with the 1, 2, and 3s together, and then another level with the 4s, just honors classes. And I like that idea in that I think it'll challenge a lot of the level 3 kids to go up to level 4. And I think that'll be good in scheduling wise, because right now we're only getting like 10 to 15 kids for those level 4 classes. So if we get some of those level 3 kids to take level 4 classes, we're going to go up to 15 or 20, which will get
Free
some
space in the lower,
Yeah, that's
the
correct.
lower levels, yeah.
That's correct. The only thing I would say is the 1, 2, and 3s. I think the superintendent's idea is to have that as a team teaching tool, and that would be great. If there's a second teacher in here, whether it be a regular teacher or a special ed teacher, I think that would be great in that we're going to be able to help all the kids, all different levels, all different.
You bring up the rear a little stronger
that's
with that
correct.
assistance, yeah.
So I think that would work. It might not. I don't think it's going to work though if we don't have those team teachers to help out in the classroom.
And that's dollar signs.
That's dollars and cents.
Right.
The other thing the only thing I'm going to pitch in is the competency-based learning, the project-based learning. Yes, that's working great at MST in a school that's based after that type of stuff.
Right.
But I personally am not sure it's going to work for every student at the regular high schools. I think that it would be a little
I just
tougher.
want to jump in. I had a grandson who, smart kid, struggled in the regular schools.
Yep.
We were constantly, getting him through, working hard to get him through. When he moved into MST, he was fortunate enough to hit the lottery and get in there. Totally transformed his life. He began wanting to learn. It turned him into a student, and it worked for him.
Yep.
I see what you're
And
saying.
that's my point. There needs to be a place for those kids, but it's not for all the kids. And we have kids that have come out of MST because they can't handle that type of learning. They need something more
A
structured
little more structure. Okay.
to get them where they need to be. So it can go both ways. And now, Jim,
Hey,
Yeah, we have a few minutes left for you,
Right.
Jim. I'm
Right.
sure you'll. What was your impression? And can you talk a little bit about? I mean, the overwhelming.
I have
vote.
an hour, and I like a lot of what Peter had to say, and I could do an hour on each one of them, and nobody wants to hear that. But go ahead. What
No,
was it?
I'm just your impressions. We don't have time to get into the nuts and bolts, but what are the highlights? What are the things that struck you as very important? What are the things that you're a little bit questionable on? And if you could tell us about what it's like to get a 12-1 vote out of the school board. I mean, maybe this school board is different, and we're going to start seeing consensus like that. But that's not what we're accustomed to.
Well, I go back to this idea. Sorry, Peter.
I was just going to say, it didn't happen our first vote, by the way. We had to go behind closed doors to fix that vote.
Yeah. I think it goes back to this idea of sharing the outcome sort of idea, right? That, like, if we can get the suspicion out of the room, and I would urge people listening to this program to kind of start from there. Please, please, please. There's things in here. I could talk for an hour about the things that I don't like in this document, and where I think there's some, real error, perhaps even. But the big picture is the people who did it spent a lot of time doing it. They have Manchester at heart. This is their vision, and it's a vision of a large number of people. Who the heck am I to doubt it? Like when did I become the guru on, Mr. Perry knows more about education in his pinky finger than I do in terms of being a teacher and being in a classroom. So I've got my own experiences. I'm not shy to mouth off my pieces, but so I think if people could just not, to take it on good faith. There's a lot of good stuff in here about having a student-centered education. I think the idea of no longer accepting mediocrity, or even something less than mediocrity. It's seen in the 26 credit numbers. I can see somebody on the 26 credit requirement, an experienced teacher even saying, hang on, we struggle just to get some of those kids to the 20%. We have an issue with 75% graduation rate. We have lots of issues. Why? And I understand that, because if you keep doing what you've been doing, and if kids are being allowed to settle for mediocrity or even inferiority, starting out of low grades all the way through, and so every year that goes by, some more kids drop into the bottom bucket. There's no effort ever made to pull them out of that bottom bucket. So they themselves are often might be disruptive, bored, not good learners, but of course they're not. They haven't been challenged in the first 7 years in school. You're not going to show up in high school suddenly going, ta-da. So I think the idea, when I like the things in here where our superintendent talks about, striving for sort of great outcomes, etc. We have Manchester Proud talking about being bold and being innovative. I wish they'd been an awful lot bolder and an awful lot more innovative. But
Well, there were a lot of things in the preliminary draft that didn't
Right.
didn't show up in this one,
the
and
things-
they were the bold
and-
ones.
and
They were the bold
the
things.
things that they chose not to touch, like the idea that, everybody, they did say, if you read the document, it says that the item that came up most, there were two items. One was trust and the other was the budget. And this board has done a lot of work on the trust issue already and changing the board from a micromanaging board to a policy board. And we're down that path quite a bit, and we've started, and we're going in that direction, and we're staying away. Dr. Goldhart will have a lot of problems in a year from now, but between now and a year from now, when we go and look and see how well he's done, he's going to have a lot of support. The fact that they didn't touch the money issue is problematic to me. But perhaps Ed, when he called in, would have problems with other pieces, or whatever else. I think it's very hard when you've gone down this road of I would say defunding, but lowering your funding in real terms compared to the needs over time, to sort of avoid any conversation of that. Don't touch the tax cap issue. We won't touch this. There's not a single talk about any of those issues. There are people, let me just say one more thing to people who are listening. There are people agitated about the lack of parent involvement. I got to tell you, if we could create a god of parent involvement, or somebody who had or a wizard who could get parents involved, glory be to that. Because, you go to meetings.
That solves a lot of problems when you have parent
I would say
involvement.
to parents, just get involved. Our problem isn't there's no one discouraging parents.
I was going to say, this doesn't
No,
oppose it.
everybody. There were I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of meetings. Parents could have gone to any one of them, and it is disappointing when you go to. I went to with Dr. Vargas. I was at numerous of his mornings and afternoons meeting with parents, and there was often one, sometimes two, never five. So, we have 14,500 students. At that launch on the 20th, if you took City Year out of the room and the politicos out of the room and the chattering class out of the room, there are 1,000 teachers, let alone 2,000 staff altogether in our schools. They weren't there. Their husbands and wives weren't there. Their kids weren't there. So, and that's not to pick on them, but the community at large. The business owners, the ones in CPG, and were there. But I didn't see all the business owners on Elm Street and the Mills all hanging out in there. So, the doors are open, folks. Step right in. We need all the help we can get, and we're very happy to have it.
Not a bad way to end the show. We're coming to the end of the show, and I always get the last word, or Bob does, but in his stead, I will take it. But I do want to say that I think this is a very important document. I'm personally very happy that the school board adopted it in any capacity, as a guide or whatever. But the one wonderful thing is, as a politician, you are getting input from your constituency right here. This all comes from the community. This is what the community says it wants. You can listen or ignore it, and it's a powerful reference in that regard.
It is.
So we're going to turn away. Thank you, gentlemen, both for coming in. I really,
Peter.
really appreciate it.
As always, really.
Excellent conversation. I wish we'd have gotten a little bit more into the details, but it always happens. We run out of time. Folks, thanks for watching the Progress Report. The show will be back next week. I will not be here, but Bob will be here. I am always away on the first Wednesday of every month, attending meetings of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and the month of March is a real important month to the Hibernians. So.
Thursday night, 8 o'clock, I'll be here.
But Jim will be here on Thursday. Maybe we can get you to the Hibernian meeting on Wednesday.
All right.
Speaking of Hibernians, folks, I'm trying to make the public aware. The AOH is sponsoring an traditional Irish music concert on March 22nd. That's a Sunday afternoon, from 4 o'clock until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Early, low dose show. Tickets are as low as $20. It will be featuring John Whalen, a 9-time All-Ireland concertina champion. It's going to be a great show, and we're hoping to get a lot of folks downtown to see that. If you can get to the Rex Theater on March 22nd, please do. You can get tickets at the Palace Theater box office. You can go online. You can call the Palace Theater. They're available everywhere. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to bridge the gap between St. Patrick's Day and the St. Patrick's Parade, which shows up the following week. So we're trying to just increase the Irishness of Manchester during the month of March, and we hope you can go. So thanks for listening, folks. Thanks for watching. Eddie, thank you for calling in. We appreciate all our callers. Bob, we know you're out there somewhere. We look forward to seeing you back here next week. Thank you to our guests. Folks, have a great night.